collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, just as your car, after it reaches a certain age, needs an MOT certificate to be legally driven on the road, should the integrity of buildings over a certain age be subject to inspection?
There should be strict laws as to the way that this is done and the frequency that this is done.
And Cyprus joined a global astronomy event to marvel at the clearest pictures yet of our solar system.
You could tell that in that bubble there would have been a star be created. So we've seen in one day the final moments of a star, but also the beginnings of a new star.
There were two stories in the press in the last week about collapsing buildings, and several people were hurt. Well, joining us to discuss the issue and indeed what needs to be done about it is the Secretary of the Paphos branch of the Cyprus Technical Chamber, ETEC. He is Yannis Koutsolambros. Yannis, thanks for joining me. This is very worrying. And I think we all know that there are many, many buildings across the island that are in a very poor state of repair. And my understanding is that we don't have proper legislation that would mean that these buildings need to be inspected and certified as safe if they're going to be rented out to people.
Let's take things from the beginning. I think there's no reason for panic. If you take the number of buildings which are, let's say, dangerous in a sense, there are very few of those. First of all, it was not collapsing buildings, collapsing balconies, collapsing cantilevers. Cantilevers, as is more or less reasonably understood, is one of the most vulnerable places in parts of the building because they're outside, they're hanging out, they're up in the air, held only by the reinforcement and the strength of concrete. Obviously, in both these cases that we had in Paphos last week, there was something wrong. Both these buildings are 40 to 50 years old. If you take the age of concrete, the concrete can age if you do not repair it and keep it in good condition. The age begins to get bad. They have aging problems after, let's say, 70 years old. By the time the concrete gets to 90, maybe it has serious problems. So a building which is 50 has passed half its life. So that needs special attention. By proper maintenance, it can last almost forever. And there are many buildings around to prove that. But we need maintenance. There is a gap in the law. And ETEC, my chamber, has always said that for the last, let's say, decade, if not more, to the parliament and all the governments that went in that period, saying that we need to inspect our buildings because buildings tend to have issues, either from poor construction, sometimes from poor design, or from any other reason, and maybe decaying materials, improper materials, and of course, plain straightforward aging. So what needs to be done with those buildings, we have pushed as hard as we could that it should be like MOT for cars. When your car gets to be, 5, 6 years old, then you need a certification every year that it's roadworthy. The same should apply at least for buildings. I'm mentioning cars because it's easier to understand. Unfortunately, there's no such provision in the law. And to make things worse, there's not even the mentality of maintenance in the minds of people. So they think that the concrete building is going to last forever. Maybe, most possibly, if we're at our midlife, it will outlast us, but it will not definitely live forever. And before we know it, there will be economic or other reasons that we tear it down and build something else.
Can I ask you whether from a technological point of view it's relatively simple for the people in the technical chamber to check, for example, how the concrete is doing? Because I think we also know that there are some unscrupulous builders in Cyprus, certainly have been in the past, who don't put the correct mixture in the concrete, so it's already not up to standard when the property is built.
Yeah, if that's the case, that's so difficult to understand. There are special hammers that you can knock on concrete elements and they can tell you what the strength is, or other means. You can even get what we call a carrot. Anyway, there are ways of defining exactly what the strength of concrete is, existing concrete, and the loss of strength over the years. This is easy to find out, but it's beyond the strength of concrete. It's how the reinforcement was constructed, what materials were used. Let's say 50 years ago, the sand came from the sea or rivers, and sea sand contains salt, which is a killer for concrete and for the maintenance of steel, as you can understand. Put a piece of steel in the sea and you will see it rot in no time. There could be a number of problems with that sort of material. Also, the reinforcement bars at that period, let's say 40, 50 years ago, they were smooth. They did not have the indentations that high-yield steel has today. So they were easier to separate from concrete. But this is not unusual, and this is not illegal, or this is not improper for the measures of the time. What is improper is that we don't take care of all these old buildings. So our suggestion to what we say in public in the last few days, but we repeat what we have always said, is that first of all, you get some professional people, experienced professional people, and there's a body of members who can go out and do that. And we usually use them after an earthquake. These guys who go around and put a sign on each and every building and say this is green, livable, this is pink, which is more or less okay, it's red, keep a distance. So these guys, they could go around. First of all, there must be some sort of committee, a small committee, fast, with a horizon of, let's say, a month. They should examine these two buildings and see what was wrong with those. Most possibly it's not the same thing. One was next to the sea with proper, visually at least, it was properly maintained. The other was in disrepair. So there might be common elements like materials of the times or reinforcement type of the times, or they could be totally separate cases. That should be examined. This is not a talk of in the coffee shop or the barber house. This is a scientific problem that needs to be resolved. So when they come back with the results of what's happening, let's say in the case that they come up with the result that buildings of that period need special care because of the materials, let's say, or because of this or that, there's not so many buildings anymore. A lot of them have been demolished and replaced by other constructions. So we could put that on a map, and then we should do a survey for all of them. I mean, a structural survey. See if they're okay, and then we take it from there. So resolve the worst problem that seems to be affecting the security of the people, and then we start moving progressively after that to get newer and newer buildings until we get things properly done and properly checked each and every year, every couple of years as needed. So that we always make sure that there is an amount of safety that should be when we walk in the street with balconies over our head, whether we live in a place of safety.
Can I ask you about what you think the legislation should say as far as owners are concerned? Because even more modern buildings are often not properly maintained. And would it be feasible for the technical chamber to be tasked with inspecting all buildings that a landlord proposes to rent out?
Yeah, that's a possibility that we can examine. It has not been something that was on the table, but we can definitely have a look at that. It's other buildings which are rented. Maybe they should have a more regular inspection, more rigorous inspection than other buildings, let's say common residential buildings that people just live permanently in. Or something. Yes, of course. Of course, public buildings should get also more often to be examined for safety because it concerns a lot of people. They're more sensitive, let's say. We should see all these differentiations. Of course, there's something to be cleared that that should be understood as the obligation of the owner, more or less. The obligation of the owner is to call the inspection, but it's the obligation of the Republic and the municipality is to check that this inspection happens when is necessary, and that should be defined by a law.
Right, now they have to clear this up because there's been a lot of toing and froing in the media between the municipality of Paphos and the Interior Ministry, and each one seems to be passing the buck to the other. So I'm not very clear about who is responsible. We do know that many owners, particularly if they themselves are not living in their own building, do tend to let things slide. So what is the answer from a technical point of view? Do we need new legislation saying exactly who is responsible for forcing the owners to make sure buildings are properly maintained?
I think maintenance should be built in the process of building and living in the building. So I think that's legal, at least talking ethically. I think that should be the owner's responsibility. When you build a building, you build your obligations with it. It's not somebody else who must come and, let's say, fix your private building. It cannot be the Republic or it cannot be the municipality who come and fix your failing balcony. So I think it's everybody's business to do that. But there should be strict laws as to the way that this is done and the frequency that this is done. So let's say there's a rule which I'm just guessing a bit. I'm just supposing, let's say after your first 10 or 15 years, then you're obliged to get a certificate from an engineer, a proper engineer who belongs to a body of valuers who can do that, and who will certify that your building is fine, at least in terms of structure. And then that should be repeated, let's say, every couple of years, and then when it reaches an age, maybe it can be every year or something. I cannot be more specific at this stage.
Okay, but that won't work, will it? Unless there is some sort of punishment, if you like, for anybody who doesn't get that certificate. Who would then have to be able to check that each building that, just like you check cars, as you said, the police stop you and they can ask for your MOT certificate. So there has to be some comeback for owners who neglect to get that certification.
Yeah, of course. As we get more and more digital, I hope that this can be done automatically at some stage. So that when you get your certificate, for example, the police knows by having a look at my registration number of my car, they know whether I have an MOT or not. They should have a regular check every now and again to see what happens with the buildings. We're not there yet. But first of all, there must be a heavy fine. If you don't do it, you should the penalty must be severe enough, which is you will be forced to do it. And of course, it must be something like a mandatory thing. When you go today and buy a building, buy, let's say, a block of flats or an independent house or anything, you had better, and the buyer should have this sort of mentality, or should be warned. I'm not sure that this is happening, that you should be checking the certificate of energy consumption. Is your building A, B, or C, or whatever? You should know. And after a period, the law says, I don't think that this applies as we speak, but very soon it will be, if you're not A or B plus, I think, you will not be able to rent your house. So this should be something like prerequisites. If you're trying to rent or sell your house, you should be able to present the documentation about the house, which is your regular inspection or your certificate of energy performance, all of these things. And that should be also part of the law, that if your energy is not proper and if you have not examined your house, you cannot sell or rent it. This will force things.
Well, it certainly seems that now that we're getting more digitised, these things could, as you say, happen online, and it would be very easy for people to go in and check whether or not a certification has been given. Pleasure talking to you, Yannis. That is Yannis Koutsoulambros, who is the secretary of the Paphos branch of the Cyprus Technical Chamber.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Earlier this week, there was a very interesting space event here in Cyprus. And the president of the Cyprus Space Exploration Organisation, the CSEO, joins us now to tell us all about it. Welcome, George Danos.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Now tell us about this James Webb Space Telescope and what you were doing earlier this week.
We had a celebration that was simultaneously around the world by NASA and the European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency. So we were part of the celebration here in Cyprus, revealing the first images of this new super powerful space telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope. And these images were really breathtaking. I have to say that I could not hold myself back from shedding tears when I saw some of the images because they were just amazing.
Now, am I right in thinking that the telescope managed to capture the final part of a dying star?
That is correct. It showed the Southern Ring Nebula in such detail that we've never seen it before. I'm sure the astronomers around the world will be studying that imaging for months after this release. And this is just the first release. There will be so many more photographs of the same object, but many other objects on the sky. And there's such a competition of what to photograph next because everybody wants to see whatever is up there in such detail and such different way, meaning it's got the ability to photograph objects up there in infrared, something that we couldn't do in such fine or refined manner as this telescope can do right now.
What's different about this telescope? I mean, we've had telescopes looking up into space for years.
That is correct. But in space, you don't have the atmosphere, which is really distorting the images with the winds flowing around in the lower and upper atmosphere. So having a telescope outside the atmosphere of the Earth provides you pristine images. And of course we had the Hubble Space Telescope, but the size of the lens of the original telescope, the Hubble, the predecessor of the James Webb, was tiny in comparison to the lens of the James Webb. Therefore, the ability to collect light and therefore see farther deeper into the universe is tremendous. It's been estimated that the James Webb Space Telescope can see 100 times further, not further, but more light with 100 times more resolution. So as a result, when with the Hubble Space Telescope we could see, for example, this moment of the dying star, we couldn't see all that detail, the texture that exists within the image. It was, if I can say it in simple terms, it was rather blurry. And then suddenly comes an image. It's the comparison of having analog TV and then suddenly going into an 8K TV, if I can use these terms.
Okay, and now then, I don't know much about space, but I also understand that there were cosmic cliffs shown. What's that?
That's a location within the Carina Nebula, and that was actually the image when I saw that I couldn't stop from crying. And we actually had an event, and during the event I couldn't open my mouth to explain what we see because the first reaction from me was just an absolute wow. That's a region where it's very similar to the Pillars of Creation. We see the creation of stars. It's like stellar nurseries. And there was so much color, so much detail. We've seen for the first time in the same photograph that we've seen before from the Hubble and other terrestrial telescopes. We've seen that photograph, but this photograph was just like seeing the whole thing all over again. And they highlighted an area where you could see this pillar coming on the side of the edges of the cliff, and you could tell that in that bubble there would have been a star being created. So we've seen in one day the final moments of a star, but also the beginnings of a new star. So it was a historic moment yesterday. And let me say that, why do I say historic moment? Back in May 1990 was when the first images of the Hubble Space Telescope were released. And it took 32 years before a successor to the Hubble was launched, James Webb, and released its first images. And we're speaking about a major step forward from those old images to these new images. And that's why we call it the most historic event in astronomy for the last 30 years.
Now, I think that Carina Nebula is, 7,600 light years away. These sort of concepts to somebody like me, George, are just, mind-boggling. It doesn't mean anything to me. Tell me a little bit about why you think that this finding out about what is out in our universe is so important for us here on Earth.
I will go to that, but let me actually comment on what you said about the age of the specific nebula or how far away it is. We took photographs yesterday of a close-by star. Well, close by, we're talking about thousands of light years away, but in terms of astronomical terms, that's just like in the neighborhood of our solar system. So we took the Carina Nebula, which is about 7,000 light years away, but then we took a photograph of a quintet of galaxies dancing together, which is hundreds of millions of light years away, and then we took the furthest picture, which is 13 point something, I don't remember the point, but 13 billion light years away. That is an absolutely crazy number. That's at the beginning of the creation of the universe. And we said that in astronomical terms, it's only approximately 350 million years after the creation. And that's only. And in our terms, in human terms, that's like, oh my God, that's before the dinosaurs. But now we're saying that, no, it's just 350 million years after the creation. And let me go to the question you asked. Yes, that's exactly why. Because we are looking at the moments of the creation of the universe and we understand how it happened. So it's bringing a lot of knowledge to us, but it's also going to possibly, and I hope that it will do, and everybody believes that it will, give us a very sought after answer. Are we alone in this universe? Because with this first spectroscopy or spectrometry image that was done of the nearby planet, we could tell that this planet, and that's for the first time we have this unique ability, that it has water in its atmosphere and clouds, not just water, clouds in its atmosphere. So knowing this information can very soon answer the question of are we alone in the universe, because if it detects CFC, chlorofluorocarbons, which is the chemical substance that can only be produced industrially. Hence, if we detect it on another planet, they must have an industry. Therefore, civilization, and that's what we use in the sprays, the aerosols, that eventually destroyed our ozone layer, and we stop using them nowadays. So this telescope can detect these, and imagine what a profound moment it would be if an announcement is made that, yes, we know there's life out there, we're not alone.
Yeah, but at the same time, let me play devil's advocate here. If you find life out there however many billion light years away, we don't have the technology to go and say hello, do we?
No, we don't. Of course we don't. But if we find life somewhere closer, for example, in the vicinity, the immediate vicinity, 4+ light years away, it basically means that if you send a message in something which is between 5 to, say, 50 light years away, the message will arrive within such a timeline. For example, if it's 5 light years away, you send a message, they get it 5 years later, maybe 5 years later, you might even get a reply. You don't know. But what is expected sociologically, discovering life and understanding that we're not alone, it will create a major shift in our mentality. And this is a completely different chapter to discuss of what it means if we discover life and we start exchanging messages between them and us.
Well, it's all an awful lot to comprehend, if you ask me, George. Just let me ask you finally, who went to this presentation earlier in the week? Was it full?
That's what makes me absolutely delighted. Our venue, we hosted this at the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization Space Research Center, which is called CSO Discovery Alpha. And we invited the world, meaning all the people, the wider audiences, to join us. And it's the first time, because of COVID, that we had the ability to say everybody's welcome to come to our center. And we opened up the center, we opened up our auditorium, we put off lots of chairs, and then we needed to put even more and even more. So the center was absolutely packed. I've never seen the center so full of joy and enthusiasm. So that's another reason why I'm so delighted, because of the way people embraced this event. And not only they came, but the questions they were asking, and they didn't want to go. So we all celebrated this together. When I say all of us, I mean here in Cyprus, but simultaneously around the world. And you could actually see that during the televising around the world, they were connecting to different locations around the planet where people just like us were celebrating this event. And if you were to go to the list of NASA and ESA, they were listing this country, and proudly our country, our center was there that we were celebrating among the rest of the nations.
Well, for those of us who weren't able to make that presentation, I'm quite sure that some of those pictures are available online. Where should people go if they want to belatedly see what was going on?
All that somebody has to do is just simply type James Webb Space Telescope images or JWST images, and you will have pages and pages in Google. But also on our Facebook, the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization Facebook page, you just type the full name, you will see the images there. We've released them already, and thousands of people are already starting to like these images. And we've just posted today one of the dying star, and yesterday we posted the one from the Carina Nebula. So join us. So there's about 350,000 followers in our Facebook page, and there's so many comments from the people discussing the photographs and commenting their excitement from seeing these images.
Well, I can hear the excitement in your voice, George. Thank you very much indeed for joining us to tell us all about it. That is George Danos, the president of the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization. You can find them on Facebook and those incredible pictures. George, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
In other news this week, a Eurobarometer survey published on Wednesday showed that 94% of people in Cyprus think that corruption is widespread, with political parties and the healthcare system seen as being particularly vulnerable to people abusing their power. Now, elections are coming up next year, and pretty well all the presidential candidates have said they will fight corruption. The problem is that it seems to be endemic in Cyprus, particularly among the political classes. The interesting thing is that many people in Cyprus say there's too much corruption, but when push comes to shove, they're more than willing to give bribes or favours to people if they think it will pay off. 92% of Cypriot respondents also said there's corruption in national public institutions. That's a rise of 3 percentage points over the 2019 survey. And 93% of people asked agreed that the links between business and politics in Cyprus lead to corruption. So obviously things need to be cleaned up on the island. Interestingly, while we're talking about being unable to cope with the influx of migrants, and also that there is not enough money in government coffers to seriously assist vulnerable groups as prices continue to rise, apparently we do have some £17.5 million for improving the road between Larnaca and Nicosia, plus another 16 million to improve the Sotira to Verinia road. Once again, we note that with elections in the offing, it seems road building takes off. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.